Good afternoon. Peel as we know it today is rich in the history and modern traditions of many First Nations. From the lands of the Anishinaabe, the Putin First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, we also acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for being stewards of this traditional territory. These lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, our social teachings are calling us in solidarity with our Indigenous brothers and sisters to honor and respect the four directions: land, water, plants, animals, and the ancestors that walked before us. All these wonderful elements of creation exist gifted to us by our Creator God. We are part of the ecosystem, not masters of it. We cannot be silent. We must show the people of this world that we are a stronger voice that must be heeded, one of unity and love. Never has it been more apparent that all things are connected and that we need each other. A territorial acknowledgement is not an end point in the journey of reconciliation. Actions create conditions for true reconciliation and create a foundation for restoring, renewing, or developing new relationships with Indigenous people.
Let us pray. Loving Creator, we give you thanks for the beauty of this planet and for all the gifts you've given us. We thank you for the great web of life of which we are a part. Help us to mend those parts of the web that we've disturbed, to restore those parts that we've torn. We pray as we gather this day that we would listen with open hearts, and that we would find direction towards how we can be good allies with our Indigenous friends, our Indigenous brothers and sisters, so that together we can mend and build bridges that will create a stronger, greater society. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Welcome to the second of Eden's Indigenous Awareness Series. Thank you to those of you who have come back to church for the second time today, and also to those tuning in from home via our live stream. We're pleased to welcome back Reverend Lee Klaus and his wife, Julia. Thank you for making the trek from Hamilton to be with us here again today. They were with us just 2 weeks ago as Reverend Lee led our worship service, including some Indigenous traditions from his Mohawk background and a message on moving towards reconciliation. He shared about his call later in life to ministry, especially Native ministry, to assist in the healing of First Nations people and the healing of the larger non-Native society. He has become a bridge between cultures, speaking with churches about reconciliation and also working with others in social justice playwriting. Reverend Lee is a retired United Church minister and a Mohawk First Nations person from the Tyendagga Mohawk territory. He is more than qualified to lead us through discussion of these two meaningful and sometimes disturbing films. Welcome, Reverend Lee and Julia.
Good afternoon. It's so nice to see so many here with us this afternoon, and welcome to those who are with us online. It is important for all of you that are here in the church today to realize that we are live streaming this event. So during this opening part and the viewing of the films, the camera will only be on the stage or on the film. However, as we move into the more interactive part, the camera will be on you. This afternoon, we'll be viewing two important Indigenous documentaries from the National Film Board of Canada. Honor to Senator Murray Sinclair, who was the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and Holy Angels. Both these films include stories of residential school survivors told firsthand. Graphic narratives and scenes of the Indian and residential school system can trigger negative thoughts, upsetting memories, which can be re-traumatizing if you, your family, or someone you know has been affected by it. Should this occur today, or if you just feel the need to speak to someone, there is support available. There's a 24-hour toll-free helpline at 1-855-242-3310, or you can connect to the online chat at www.hopeforwellness.ca. If you're with us here in the church today, we're very, very fortunate to have Judy Haydock with us. And Judy has been trained and has experience in helping those deal with trauma. So if you need to speak to someone, Judy is here for that this afternoon. So having said that, we're going to move into the viewing of our films. We will be starting with Holy Angels. And briefly, Lena Wandering Spirit in 1963 became one of the more than 150,000 Indigenous children who were removed from their families and sent to residential school. Holy Angels recaptures the colonialist history through impressionistic images and a fragmented language of a child. Honor to Senator Murray Sinclair shares the powerful speech the senator gave when he accepted the WFM Canada World Peace Award. With determination, wisdom, and kindness, Senator Sinclair remains steadfast in his belief that the path to actual reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people requires understanding and accepting often difficult truths about Canada's past and present.
I could hear it all over. The squeaking, the howling, footsteps, chain. Somebody's gonna come there, or a ghost. My sister and I, she was 8 and I was 7 years old. That's when they come. That bombardier had 2 big lights there. Where are they taking us? And who are these people, you know? Kids crying, tears frozen. They took me, like everybody else, away from their mother, away from their love. Your number is 34. They call us by number. I want the whole world to see what they used to do to us, to know. They used to scrub us and everything. Water, lighter fluid. Oh my goodness, bleeding. You can never change color. We're not an apple. My brown will never go away. No matter how hard I scrub. Savages. I remember that word lots. We are going to civilize these savages. The mother, that's the last word I heard, and she slapped me. I used to be locked up in there a lot of times. In a cupboard. Put me in a cupboard there. They forgot about me. I had to break it down. They didn't want us to have too much of our culture. They took that away as soon as we first went in there. And what was wrong with our culture? Nothing. We used to get hit in the mouth if we spoke our language. I used to stutter because of being so scared, you know. When am I gonna get hit? I used to speak quite a bit fluently before I went to school. They just slap it right out of us. Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. What is sin anyway? Wash me, for I acknowledge my transgressions and my sin. Now on Sundays, they used to have like candies. Hurry up, hurry up. I used to be almost the first one downstairs. The porridge they used to serve us. Oh, there used to be worms in it. And we used to have to eat it. Sit there and eat it. The worms and all. At night when the nuns are sleeping, I sneak downstairs and go and eat. Kispen sagihin si makawitzimen. Kispen kapwagwasan si makawayawa. Cowboys and Indians shooting each other? That's the only movie night I remember. They'd fall and they'd get up again and shoot. Sometimes I always wonder, I wonder where's Mom and them? I remember my granny. She liked it in the bush, all by herself, and the kids. She taught me a lot. Making dry fish, dry meat. You hammer it and hammer it, and you put berries in and bear grease. That's my ice cream. She'd tell stories. First, make me a cigarette. They used to make them like cigars. My grandmother used to call me Squeeze, because I was a little girl. I miss her. I miss her, I miss my mother. You're lost without them. You're lost without a culture. You're lost without love. Run, my sister said. Take off. So I was looking around, seen all this barbed wire. Run. And there me I am, just running as fast as I could. Where am I going to run to anyway, I was thinking, you know? So I just stayed in the bush. They come and got me. I used to sleep with my sister, keep me warm. I was caught sleeping with my sister. So she spanked me, put me over there beside Julie. She had a problem controlling it. You know, to pee. She was so scared. They had this heater from the big boiling room. And it goes round. The squeaking, the howling, and crying. One starts, everybody does. Why did they bring us to this? I'm glad they demolished the school. Nobody's got to go through that hell. It's just like being in jail. Like, I used to be so happy before I went in the convent. Because it was free. We could go running around barefoot. Pick berries, watch my granny, and then she'll get up. Start dancing with her little hands like this. and she'd be smiling. I want to be able to dance like my grandmother. Walking down the aisle with big moccasins on, jingling dress. Oh, it'll be awesome. I like Wandering Spirit because it just fits who I am.
We are on Iroquois land, and the reason that we are here is the presentation of the World Federalist Movement, Canada's 2016 World Peace Award to Senator Murray Sinclair.
Thank you for your consideration of the work that I've been involved in as a basis for this presentation. Rest assured that I know in receiving this that it isn't just the work that I have done, but the work of other people as well, including my two colleagues, Commissioner Chief Wilton Littlechild and Commissioner Dr. Marie Wilson. The idea of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission had come about as part of the negotiations surrounding the residential school settlement agreement because it had become an international means by which nations could move from a point of conflict to a point of fairness and justice in society without concentrating on the aspect of vengeance and revenge upon those who had perpetrated injustices before. You may remember that we took over a commission that had stumbled badly at the outset, and we had inherited a commission that was largely controlled by the Government of Canada. And as commissioners, we were asked to see what we could do to revive the commission and to put it back on proper footing, and that was hard. There was a lot of anger, and we, as commissioners, knew that we had to deal with that and had to, first of all, convince the intended beneficiaries of the process that they should participate, that we knew it would be hard for them to relate their stories publicly, but we knew that it was important because, quite frankly, most of Canada did not know anything about residential schools. And even those who knew about the schools being in existence, they didn't have any idea of what happened in those schools.
As a survivor of the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School, I am here to verify we were treated like a herd of animals. I saw children shivering in their beds because of the thin blankets. I saw girls forced to eat their own vomit. I saw children gagging on their food because they didn't like it and then swallow it in fear of the nun's mighty hand. I saw and heard children sobbing in the night. I saw children hanging out of windows from the top floor to use the bathroom so they wouldn't wet their beds. I saw a young girl bleeding heavily in her bed for at least a week before they sent her to a hospital.
I lost my innocence. I lost my dignity. I lost my pride. I was beaten. I was told that I was stupid, dumb, lazy, ugly, that I was a savage. I didn't learn anything. I didn't learn anything in that school.
I used to get a licking every day, whether I needed or not, in the residential school because I couldn't speak English.
And even those who had heard stories about what had happened in the schools tended to fall victims to those who said that isn't true, that didn't happen. And so survivors felt badly done by, and from the perspective of the Commission, we had to get their support. It took about a year. We made commitments to them, and we bound ourselves to certain promises and certain actions that we would undertake. And we told them we would do it, and then we set about doing it.
Well, to know truth, we must begin by telling it.
And by the time we had completed our first national event about a year later in Winnipeg, we had in attendance at that event 20,000 people who listened to the stories of survivors and who, in large numbers, were influenced by the work of the Commission and the stories of the survivors, that in fact what the survivors were saying had a lot of validity to it. We engaged with leaders of the churches and leaders of government to ask them to try to make an effort to speak to their target audiences, to those whom they influence, about the validity of the process and the importance of it.
I couldn't at the time believe that in my country that such a thing happened. And what I can't believe even more is that it was hidden.
With that support, and with the support of growing numbers of survivors, we went on with our work. So that ultimately, by the time we delivered our report in June of 2015, with our calls to action, and our final report in December of 2015, we knew that there was a growing and a large population of people in the country who believed in what we had done and who believed what the survivors were saying, and that to them now the answer to the most important question lay in front of them, and that is, what can we do about it? And the answer to that question was, look at the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People as the framework for reconciliation. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was a document that has a unique history at the UN. That history includes the fact that those countries that were most actively engaged in cultural genocide activities were the ones most resistant to adopting the UN Declaration. Canada was one of the last countries to adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and if you read it, you will see, in fact, that there is much that it says about what Indigenous people should be protected from and should have a right to going forward, and that they should have had a right respected to those things from the outset of their relationship with colonial governments. And in Canada, most people are not aware, in fact, that a similar set of commitments had been made to Indigenous people back in the 18th century with the Royal Proclamation of 1763, following the French-English wars in North America and the taking of power by the King of England over much of North America. A proclamation was issued in order to appease and to reassure the Indigenous people of North America that the government had no intention on going to war against them, and that their intention as a government was, in fact, to respect their rights to govern themselves, to respect their right to their lands, to respect their right to occupy their territories without challenge by the government unless they gave up their right in an agreement process. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 is important for that reason. It also happens to be important because it's one of the most arrogant documents in the world. To think that a king of England somewhere across the ocean would have the right or the ability to, in fact, make a declaration like that over the lives of Indigenous people elsewhere is pretty typical of the impact of the doctrine of discovery and the thinking behind it. But that said, it was a document that, in fact, was then conveyed to Indigenous leaders throughout North America at the Treaty of Niagara process that occurred in 1764, when Indigenous leaders from all over North America were brought to gatherings with the Crown's representative, where the document and the Royal Proclamation was explained to them, and assurances were given to them that they could rely upon from that point forward. And in fact, that process directly led to the American War of Independence, because they didn't like the proclamation in what is now the United States. They didn't like the fact that they were being restricted from doing what they wanted to do all along, and that was to take the land. The Royal Proclamation's contents became so well known among Indigenous people that it influenced the subsequent treaty-making process that occurred after Confederation in the 1870s, when those treaties that were signed, beginning with Treaty 1 in Manitoba, there are provisions that were not included in the treaties, such as the right to self-government, the right to maintain their culture, their language, their institutions, because the Indigenous leaders had already been assured that that was part of English law, that Indigenous sovereignty would continue, and that Aboriginal people didn't have to put those provisions in the treaty. And yet the Government of Canada immediately set out to subvert all of that, and they did it through legislation. And they conducted their own war against the First Nations people and Indigenous people in the West, including the Métis and the Inuit, by passing laws which took away their right to ownership, which took away their right to self-government, which interfered with their ability to educate their children in their schools in their own way, which interfered with their ability to raise their children, took away their ability to use the resources, to maintain their incomes, to maintain their economies based upon the use of those resources, took away their interest in the lands overall to such an extent that the government felt that it had the right to give away those resources to whoever they wanted to, without Indigenous permission. And so since Confederation, the Government of Canada conducted itself in a manner that was totally contrary to the Royal Proclamation of 1763. If you wanted to protest, laws were passed that made it illegal for Indigenous people to gather and complain about the Government of Canada and its activities. Indian conspiracy laws said in the 1880s that if 3 or more First Nations people gather for the purpose of complaining and conspiring to take action against the government for what it did, they could be prosecuted, incarcerated, and any positions that they held within the leadership of the community would be removed from them. If you wanted to go to court against the Government of Canada, in order to challenge the legislation, you had to get permission from the Minister of Indian Affairs first. There is no known instance of the Minister of Indian Affairs ever giving permission to being sued. If you wanted to sue the minister for what happened to you in residential schools, you had to hire a lawyer. So they amended the Indian Act to say that if any lawyer agreed to represent an Indian in an action against the Government of Canada without getting permission from the Minister of Indian Affairs first, then he would be disbarred. Of course, it was always men who were lawyers. Women were not allowed to practice law for some time. Most people think that First Nations people didn't have the right to vote until 1961, but that's not exactly true. In 1885, as part of his thinking that if we're going to convince people to, Indigenous people to become citizens, we should give them the right to vote as long as they can vote in accordance with provincial rules. Sir John A. Macdonald amended the voting laws of Canada to allow Indigenous people to vote so long as they were male, over 21, and owned property. Well, it didn't take long for Indigenous people to organize and vote one of the Conservative MPs out of office. And so in 1891, they amended the voting laws of Canada to take away the right to vote in a piece of legislation interestingly called the Indian Advancement Act of 1891. And they did it interestingly, perhaps in a way that sort of reflects the thinking of the time. They did it by amending the definition of the word person, where it said that any person has the right to vote, or any person who qualifies in this way can vote. They amended the word person by saying person includes anybody other than an Indian. And of course, taking military action was difficult. You could, in fact, go to war against the government. The government was very concerned about that, and in fact, that was one of the rationales behind Indian residential schools. We have found documents in the archives of Canada in which military officials and Northwest Mounted Police officials encourage the Department of Indian Affairs to ensure that more and more children are placed in residential schools because, the documents say, if we have their kids, they will be less inclined to go to war against us.
I thought I would be brave to face the demons that haunted me for 49 years. But I see today and since Monday that it still affects me for the things that happened through the 49 years that I kept hidden in me. I left home, and I didn't know why or where I was going, but I went into a plane with my sister and brother back in 1960, 62, 61, 62. And then we came to this building that used to sit across here. And then they separated us. After our separation from my sister and brother, I wasn't able to speak to them again. My mom come to visit me at one time, and I couldn't even see her. And I used to look at the stars, and I used to think, my mom and dad are seeing the same stars I'm looking at. But I really, really was alone, lonely, scared. Before my 8th birthday, a couple of months before that, John Como, who was supposed to be a trusted man, I'm sorry for mentioning his name, but I was taken from my bed with my mouth covered and I don't remember going into the room, his room. But I carried that sexual abuse and assault for 49 years.
For 7 generations, children were placed in those schools, and you've heard, we've told you about what happened to them. Many, of course, were abused. Of the 89,000 living survivors who filed to be compensated for having gone to the schools, 37,000 of them claimed injuries resulting from the schools, almost 40%. And if you extrapolate that over the years to include all of those who were no longer alive at the time the settlement agreement was reached, you're dealing in the hundreds of thousands. And that's a huge amount of abuse that went on in the schools. But what that also tells us is that there was a certain percentage that were not physically or sexually abused. And that's true. We heard from many survivors, in fact, who told us they were not abused in the same way that others had talked about. But at the same time, they all admitted that they lived in constant fear that they would be. And if they didn't do what they were told, if they didn't follow the directions, if they didn't believe what they were told, they thought they would be abused.
I remember very well one day when Josephine, my sister, her number was 44, and 4 other girls whose numbers were number 5, number 33, and number 70, who had wet their beds, and all 4 of them were punished by draping the wet spot on their noses and made to stand.
It makes you sick. And I'm sick. My kids will be sick. My community, everything is passed on.
And living in that kind of an environment does something to you. It really harms you. It's living in a traumatic state for an extended period of time, particularly from the time that you're a little child until you're an adult, a young adult. And you come to believe in the stories. You come to believe in the mythology of what you've been told. And that has been one of the lasting legacies of the residential school system. But Indigenous children who went to public schools were harmed in the same way. The same message was given, that Indigenous people were inferior, that they were on the verge of extinction, and they were damn lucky that Europeans came and saved them from freezing to death or starving to death or falling off the edge of the world. Never mind that we'd been here for 40, 50,000 years before that, thank you very much, without any help from you. When we talk about Confederation, we talk about the history of this country, of this nation, there is no discussion about any role that Indigenous people might have had. There is no discussion about the importance of the treaties to the expansion of Canada into the West. Indigenous people were treated in the history books of this country and in the public schools as irrelevant to the nation-building process. And in fact, were presented as a problem in the history books to the nation-building exercise. But that not only impacted the Indigenous children who were there, it impacted the non-Indigenous children as well. Impacted you. Those of you who went to public schools in this country were taught that. You were taught to believe that Indigenous people, Indigenous civilizations, Indigenous nations were inferior, that they had no legitimate rights, that they had nothing to protect, that they were, in fact, inferior. It created a sense of superiority on the part of the non-Indigenous students in the schools when it came to the other Indigenous students in the schools. The way children are being educated today has to change, so that as they are being raised, as they are moving through society, as they are developing and growing into the careers that they will eventually fill after you leave this earth, that they will be able to conduct that work in a far more fair-minded manner, understanding that in fact Indigenous people were not inferior, with a full understanding of what Indigenous people in fact had and lost and contributed to this country, and what it was that we can do today in order to revive those things that were damaged, to return those things that were taken, to rebuild those things that were destroyed, and to renovate the relationships that have been hurt. It's going to take a long time. Getting to the truth was hard and time-consuming. Getting to reconciliation is going to take generations. It's going to take generations, but it's important for us to do it. It's important for us to do it because each and every one of us needs to understand that it's no longer about us, really. It's about our children. It's about our grandchildren. It's about those little ones. When Cindy Blackstock organizes little kids to come out and talk about things like Jordan's Principle, she's bringing together people who are not racist. She's bringing people together who respect each other, who like each other, who want to be like each other, who want to learn from each other, who want to play with each other. And that's important. Children are inherently going to be the battleground for reconciliation going forward. And they're going to be inherently able to grasp this quickly if we give them the opportunity to learn that. When you look around at the way that young Indigenous leaders today, many of whom are well educated, many of whom have far more education than I have, and have a good grasp not only of Western education, but of their own traditional histories, ceremonies, and the teachings of their elders, they have a view of change that may not be compatible with yours. And they are going to demand it, and they're going to insist upon it. They're going to push for it. And there's going to be conflict because of that. And we need to ensure that we can find a way to address that conflict in a reasonable way. Because if we don't, then it could get out of hand. And we cannot allow that to happen. We cannot allow for that formula to develop in that way. We have to look for a way to develop a relationship in a peaceful way so that we will be able to look back at our history in the future, long after we've gone, to say that we have contributed to a process that has resulted truly in transitional justice in this country.
I hope from this that we can send a message to create that process of hope for our children and our grandchildren.
I no longer live by the number 142. I'm Paul Budrak, and I have the right to live. And I have the right to be happy because I know I deserve it. And my children, if they can hear me, they have the right to come say, Dad, we didn't like what you did. And I can say I know and I'm sorry. And I thank this gathering here for listening to my story. It hasn't been an easy road, but we're not alone in it. Thank you.
And so my challenge to you is look at what you can do. Seriously, look at what you can do. Take a look at the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and pick one. Do what you can to make it happen. They're not all huge, complicated processes. Talk to your colleagues, talk to your employers, talk to those institutions where you might have even a little bit of influence, to help them understand that you believe in this. Because if they do not hear from you, they will assume that you don't care. And we don't want that to be the case. Stand up, be noticed, take action. You can do that. The only way that change ever occurs is when the citizens of this country are the ones who decide to take action. And you are the ones who will do that. I appreciate your attention. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you again to the Society for the wonderful presentation you've made to me and for the recognition that has been bestowed upon me. Miigwech.
I'd like to take some time and do a ceremony and smudge our church. The things we've heard have been pretty drastic. The things we've seen have been pretty drastic. And the act of smudging with sage will maybe help us to purify our church. All things happen in a circle, and they usually happen for us in the beginning, in the direction of the east. Creator God, we give you thanks. We give you thanks for the direction of the east and a place of new beginnings, of new birth, of new ideas, of new understandings. You have blessed us with beginnings, with new beginnings, and these we give you thanks. To face the direction of the south, Creator God, we give you thanks for the south, the direction of the south, which is the place where the warm sun comes, where life grows, where we are blessed, and our ideas come forth and begin to enliven, to grow. And they do that with excitement and enthusiasm. And so that's the direction of the south. Our enthusiasm. We give thanks to Creator God. We now face the direction of the west. Creator God, this is the place where the rains come, where the waters water and sustain the earth. As our ideas and our new beginnings have grown, the thunderers leaven the growth into maturity and with understanding and with the building of relationships, to see that we are not alone, that we live with each other, and we live with you. You have blessed us. Creator God, I come to the direction of the north. It's the place of strength for all the things that we have done, all the things that we have learned. We give you thanks for the wisdom that indeed is your lifeblood, that holds you, that holds us. It's the direction of the north, the time of death and life and the planting of new seed. And so we give you thanks for all these things that you have given to us. Amen and amen. I'm on Mississauga territory. I'm Haudenosaunee or Ongwehonwe, and I should be walking this way. But I am trying to remember to walk this way to honor the Mississaugas of the Credit. for the voice that speaks to us. I'm going to invite everyone to please, if you would, come up into the circle, and we'll do a smudge. The smudge is an act of praying. It's a time of reflection. It's a time of silence. And so what we do with the smudge, would you hold this for me, please? Thank you. What we do with the smudge is, first of all, we take the smoke and wipe our heads to clear our minds, to settle our minds down, and to become present. And then those of you that have glasses, you might want to take them off. You want to take some smudge again, some smoke again, and wipe your eyes. You wipe your eyes so that we can see things. And as we see things, truth becomes apparent. We take some more smoke and we wipe our ears, that we can hear things in good ways and understandings, and we hear truth from others. It might not be our truth, but it's their truth. So we're paying attention to them, and you're hearing what they're saying. And we take some more smoke and we smudge our mouths. By smudging our mouth, that helps us to be able to talk in a good way, in a loving way. in a respectful way. Then we take more smoke and we wipe our hearts. And as we wipe our hearts, we connect all things together in ourselves. And then after we're finished, we would stand and wait for others. And because this is a time of their prayer as well, you don't want to talk to your friends. Thank you. One thing about that I'm never to do is to blow on the smoke. It's a trick that I've learned to put a candle out by clapping above it, rather than There's probably tradition for that. I invite you all to stand. It's going to take a little while. Okay, wipe some smoke on your head. Wipe some smoke on your head. Would you hold on to this then for a minute? Careful of this, it's hot. It's a case of taking the smoke on my ears, on my eyes, on my mouth, and on my heart. And you can even rub it around in your hand too. That way. That's good. Don't burn yourself. Pick on me. Would you hold that for a minute, please? Thank you. One of the teachings of the eagle feather is that because the eagle can fly the highest and is the strongest and bravest of the birds, because it flies the highest, it's being held up by the breath of Creator God. And so that's the reason for using the eagle feather, is Creator God is kissing you. Amen. You can sit down now. Now, the second thing is we're going to do a sharing circle, and I think I've got two questions that I want to ask you. The first question is, what did you see and how did it affect you? And in order to do this, I'm going to pass the eagle feather in this direction. And when you take the eagle feather, you can talk. When you're finished talking, hand it to the next person. If the next person wants to talk, do the same thing. If you don't want to talk, then just simply take that feather and pass it on to the next person. So we'll start here and end up over here. You don't have to stand up, you don't have to dance or anything else, it's up to you. What did you think of the movie? Okay, if you can't talk or don't know, then pass it along to the next person. To the next person. Okay? Right, and sit down. Did you talk about what you saw in the two films that bothered you or that you observed? And if you don't want to say anything, just pass the eagle feather along.
I think that Justice Sinclair is to be commended for a tremendous job, immense, almost impossible job, to let people who need to tell the truth, who's been holding it in all these years and had a chance to tell the truth. It was an amazing job, and I really think everybody in the country should see this movie because it shows you how much we need to learn to do work together.
I saw more clearly how much we weren't taught as children, and it has left me confused to understand why that would be.
I saw the same thing, knowing that as a child in rural Quebec, in my learning years, grades 2, 3, and 4, that we were totally sheltered from what was happening in the rest of our country. It's shocking.
This process that was included very much in my boyhood. I grew up in Syria Orthodox Church. And it's something that censored very much too, but very much essence of it's kind of about
I would invite us as we are sharing to speak up just a bit. I've got a little bit of an advantage here because I have a microphone, but everybody else, push it. Thank you.
Yes, I was impressed with the movie. It hurt as well. As Bill said, being taught in rural Quebec, there were rulers, but you really didn't know or even investigate, or there wasn't any leadership that taught us about what was happening.
Just talk to them, just see if they can do some miracle stuff.
it was a good movie, and it was good to know how other churches get together and pray and learn more about the God. But it's too bad to have to fight for so many of the rights, and we have so much freedom in this country. Amen.
I was humbled by the atrocities. It's hard to believe from all of us that have been so privileged to that just in the, not that long ago, these people were treated as almost second-class citizens, and we were living such a privileged world, and they still to this day are hurting immensely. And although there's movement to try and identify this and correct it, we have such a long way to go to repair the damage that has been done.
Okay. Is this on? Oh, it is now. Okay. Well, I grew up in Kitchener, Ontario, not very far from what is now known as Five Oaks outside of Paris. Was known as Camp Tyandanega for many years, and Mohawk people lived in that area. So I did have some positive early influence from what I was learning of people there and at school. But as was getting older and finding out these other things that we heard about today, it became very stressful, and I'm certainly glad for the people like Murray Sinclair that are helping us to become much more aware, and hopefully we can become more active in helping things to change.
I'm of the generation that, to a large extent, was oblivious, just oblivious to what we have witnessed today. I think the first major opening that came for me was back in 1987 when the General Council of the United Church finally started the process toward reconciliation. And as part of that, some of the stories that you heard today were told for the first time in my hearing. And I have to say, I have never yet been able to absorb the pain of the children and of the parents and of the communities, what they would put through. I so appreciated that the senator said, we have to begin with the truth. We must face the truth. But then we must work to the reconciliation. There is no point in violent reaction that does not resolve it. But reconciliation is a long journey, and I think that was pointed out today.
Well, what struck me is that just the power of prejudice, the power of white privilege, basically, and just the sheer numbers of lives that were affected by it, and the number of lives that didn't even survive, which is just unfathomable. So, I find it difficult to understand how, and I do understand, I know what the power of prejudice is, but the idea that, you would treat other people's children in such a way you would never treat your own is truly a horrible mystery to me.
Like John, I also was shocked because a lot of it was talking about the 1960s is when I started school as well. And to not know anything about what was going on. But the other thing to me is so shocking is that you can look at a small child like that and not see a person. That, that you can abuse them, hit them, treat them so badly. I just can't understand it. I mean, that you can see anyone, and a child like that, and take away their hope and their joy. It's just shocking.
I saw pain. I felt pain. And I also feel anger. And like many people are saying, I can't believe that I grew up as a happy little kid in Canada. And I always thought Canada was just the best country in the world. And that view for me changed the first time that I went with my daughter to the Amnesty International Right for Rights Day at their office. And I expected to be writing letters that day, that night, by candlelight to leaders around the world who did not look after their citizens. But I spent that night writing letters to Stephen Harper, because that's when I learned about what had happened here in Canada. And I couldn't believe it. I was an adult, and I thought, how did I get to be this age and not know anything about this? So I am committed to being an agent of reconciliation and change.
I'm really glad I've come today. I'm overwhelmed and saddened that I really didn't know what was going on when I was growing up as well.
I also am part of that generation that was very oblivious growing up in Montreal. It was just the Métis out west, and that was it. Though we did have a reservation. I don't know what else to call it. That was the terminology back then, but just outside of Montreal. I've learned more since then. And I battle with disgust for what we've done. I saw so much pain in that video, but I also saw hope. And I'm hoping, no, I'm not hoping, we are going to make this better, and it is going to take generations. But we cannot give up, ever.
The first film really upset me. The young girl, the mother, the young woman. The 60s, during that period, my two children were born, 64 and 65. I didn't know that was happening to other children, and it really made me sad to think that my kids were safe and I was happy with them, and other mothers were suffering as their children were taken away. So I will also work towards reconciliation. I'll do whatever I can. I'll write lots of letters. I'm glad I came today too.
I grew up in Manitoba, in Winnipeg, and I went to Catholic schools in Winnipeg. And as a young child, an elementary school student, it was a Catholic girls' school. We had girls from the reserve who were in our class, and they lived in what was known as the residence. It wasn't connected with our school, but they got on the bus every morning and came to my school. And they were so quiet. They kept very much to themselves. And I mean, I was maybe 9 or 10, we didn't understand why they were there, why they were living in the city away from their families. We didn't understand why they were so quiet. And when I think back on it now, now I have a better understanding, but we were children, and I never saw any of those young girls mistreated, but they obviously never felt that they belonged there, maybe. But anyway, I think of them often.
I must say that I have seen particularly the film with Murray Sinclair in the past, and over the last number of years I've been thinking about this. It's still deeply troubling to see and to hear and know what goes on, but where I'm really at in this space is his notion that seeing the children and seeing the young ones getting together, there's no prejudice amongst kids and children when they're young. It's the adults. It's the adults. It's the big people in this world that made the bad choices. So that's where I have the hope. And my hope and my heart is that there will be time. And understand, I agree with Senator Sinclair, that's going to take many, many years, many generations. But we have to do it, and it's little steps. And I think the understanding is, we know what's happened. We often say, and part of the reason we're working on different things and trying to understand is that we cannot change the past. I've never found anyone that can change the past. I don't know if you have. I'd like to know how, because there's certain things I would like to change for sure, and this being one of them. We can't do that, but we can help influence in a positive way the future. And I think the big thing that I'm when I think about this, the impact on the Indigenous children and their families, and the impact that is going on continually. Paul speaking right there, that fellow, I thought, he's about my age, and he's there, just heartbreaking to him. But the fact that he could tell his story, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Murray allowed that. He got that out. But here's my real thought on this is, as we're living today in 2023, and you're picking up a newspaper and you're seeing a story that impacts, there's a lot of our Indigenous brothers and sisters and children and parents and friends in this country that are still being influenced in very negative ways, that aren't being given the love and the respect and the education. Look through the Truth and Reconciliation report that was published in 2015. How many have not been acted on? Each one of us, to write a letter, to write somebody around the world, to talk to your MPs and to make these things happen. And have an understanding and look at it through the lens of that poor Indigenous child that now is a teenager that made a bad choice. And in terms of their impact in the system in terms of justice, but understand that some of that can come from the parents. These children that were abused and all that impacts their parenting skills. It's just not gone. That we get it now, and boom, we're not there. So we have to continue to pray and work and try to make a difference. And, that's sort of where I'm at with it.
What struck me was that you hear about these stories, but it didn't really hit me until I heard it told by one of those people firsthand, as opposed to hearing, oh, this happened or that happened. And so that really made it real, and therefore uncomfortable and disturbing. And like everyone else said, we grew up in the school system in the 60s, and I had no idea. I can remember speaking to my parents about it, who, if they were alive, would be well into their 90s. And so they grew up as adults during the 50s and 60s,
and they had no idea. And so it just blows my mind that something so big and horrible could be silenced for so long. And that these documentaries and events like this hopefully bring us together to move forward.
So many things going through my mind. We talk about living in the 60s and not knowing about it. I was teaching Aboriginal studies, as a matter of fact, grade 6, in the early 1990s. I knew nothing about residential schools until I came across a picture book, George Littlechild. I remember the book. I still have it at home. And here's this picture of this residential school. Many of our children were forced to go to this school. I started looking into it. That's when I first learned about it. But here I was a teacher of our children. Wish I could go back to those grade 6 classes and teach them what they should have been being taught. And I'm hoping, I know the curriculum is changing. My son is now teaching grade 6, and I know they're making sure the stories are out. But what I really observed in both those films is the importance of story. I mean, all of the people that we heard from there, that woman, a wandering spirit, and just saying she wants to get her story out there. She wants people to know what was happened. It was beautifully done through the dancing of the young girl who seemed to be so carefree, the contrast between her carefree dancing and the story that was being told. But that important, she was able to get that out there. And then number 142, realizing he didn't have to be number 142 anymore. He could be Paul Bendra, whatever the last name was, and just his tears and just knowing that the stories, that's one of the reasons we wanted to do these types of activities, is to get the stories out there. And I'm reminded of when we took a group from the church down to Six Nations. I don't know how many people here were with us that day, but the Mohawk, the residential school, was closed for renovation, but they did show us a video that had been made going through all the different rooms of the school before it was closed down. And there was not a dry eye when we were finished to hear the stories from these people. And we're all saying to them at the end, what can we do? What can we do? And the one thing I've always remembered her saying is, she says, share our story, tell our stories. So, but as Patty says, it's one thing to hear about the stories, and it's another thing to hear the survivors with the stories. So find any ways that you can to keep learning these stories. Hear the survivors telling their stories. Do what we can. That's why we're presenting a call to action each week. We're not preaching about it, but trying to get out there what are some things that need to be done. So thank you for being here.
Over the last couple of years, we've heard things in the news that have happened in residential schools, and seeing these two films brought it to light how depressing it must have been for these children, and just can't imagine what they went through. And you're not sure who's in the better shape, the children that passed away or the children that survived, because listening to Paul, it's something you don't get over. It stays with you all your life. But hopefully, like he said, the generations that come after him will have it better. And hopefully by groups like this that get together and to learn more information, educate ourselves and try and figure out what's the best way to find some resolution for these people. I can't believe what the government took away from them. Like basically their whole life. They couldn't practice their culture anymore, and the government took their land. And just try and picture if that happened to one of us. Like, it's, hopefully we can make a difference and things will get better in the future.
Well, these are so powerful and they're so emotional. The pain is so real and raw even today. at the age of 49, I think he said, or 46. I think what I'm taking away from all of this is that we have to listen. We have to listen to them tell their story. This pain doesn't stop, I don't think, with Paul, because he spoke about his family and to forgive him. And I think it goes on into the next generation, and we see the problems within the residential or the reservations with the young people, that they're struggling. I think we have to really listen, we have to be there, and we have to try to be heard, us, to make a change.
Well, I wasn't born here. I came in the 70s to Canada, and I'm quite surprised to see, I came from South America, and to see what goes on in the school system here, and the hurt and the suffering that the people go through, the kids went through. It's very hurtful.
I've listened to your stories, and each story that I heard, I had another story come in my own head. And it's hard to hear that, and it's hard to listen. One story I want to tell you was about my aunt, who I dearly loved. She had a young son my age, and we used to chum around together and get into trouble together all the time. And Wayne was a year older than I was, and his parents were not Native, hadn't come from the reserve at Tyendinaga. And I was raised to not talk about the fact that I was Native, because my mom and dad knew that would always end up, I would get hurt because of that. And so that was my self-disciplining fear of telling other people that I was Native. My cousin Wayne, he was a bright guy, but he didn't have the smarts to go through university, but he had the smarts to go through life. And he failed grade 6. That was back in the years when you could fail a class, actually. And Mom and Dad and I and my other brothers went down to visit Aunt Jean and Uncle Don, and we stayed with them for a bit, had supper. Aunt Jean told me that I wouldn't pass grade 6 because her son Wayne failed. And you know, from that time on, I didn't work very hard until my mother got my attention, saying, "You get busy and study." So I did make it through grade 6. And so that's a story that stays with me, is when somebody tells you that you're dumb or that you're stupid. And that was the understanding they had at that time of Native people. And then I listened to Murray Sinclair talk about that and wonder how many times people have heard that and thought it was true. You can't do that. You're not good enough. Another story that I have, and sorry, Julia, but it's when I was a little older and starting to court, if I found a girl that I thought was interesting, we'd pull over to the side of the road and have the talk that I was Native, I was part Native, and that she might not have any children if anything happened. She might not have the children that she was expecting. That's how strong that brainwashing was.
What you said is, you might never want to see me again, go on another date because I'm Indian.
Well, I was really covering my bases then. And that was pretty important for a young fellow. Imagine if your children did that to you. The thing that took the wind out of my sails as I've been on this journey is the unmarked graves. I've heard stories through our church that there were thousands and thousands and thousands of children that didn't make it out of residential schools. And I was surprised when all of a sudden they're finding buried bodies. And these children didn't necessarily die because they were abused, but they weren't taken care of health-wise. And they're still finding more and more bodies. And yet in the beginning at church, we didn't talk about it. At Francis Sandy, we talked about a lot of things, a lot of terrifying things, but we didn't talk about unmarked graves. And so that sort of flattened me a little bit to understand that. I guess the one thing, and hopefully I can make this my last thing, I'm really appalled at our history. And I was reading some of the court cases in which lawyers described how Native people were not suitable to own land or to be civilized. And that, pardon the expression, that shit still is there, and it has to be changed. Because that infects our whole Supreme Court system, our whole lawyering system. Sorry if there's any lawyers here, but we have a big thing to change, and that's why Murray Sinclair says it's going to take us a long time to fix that, because it is. It will. What can we do? And I think I want to talk about that. I'm going to pass the feather on again, and you can be thinking of what small thing you can do, if you can do anything. Whether it's tell a friend, write a letter, tell the people that want you to vote for them, rattle their chains, etc. Please don't be afraid to talk. Would you like to talk? No? Would you like to talk? Okay. Would you like to talk? I'm going to take this from you. Thank you.
I think one of the things that I am going to do, it's been a couple of years since I've read them, but I'm going to reread the call to actions from the Truth and Reconciliation Council, and I know that I will find inspiration there in terms of something specific that I can do. I also, I shared with a couple of you earlier that I've just started to come to some services at the United Church, and I'm surprised to hear that the United Church, that ran residential schools, made its apology, I think in 1989. It was 87. So it's been decades of sort of acknowledgement, and it's I feel like there's momentum to do things, and I really hope that momentum continues to grow.
It's interesting that you brought that up, that the United Church actually ran some of these residential schools. Most of the things that we saw there were Catholic, but they weren't in it alone. The Anglicans and the Presbyterians and the United Church were all part of this system. I think what I'd like to do is promote this at my church, have a sharing circle, and see this film. I think it's well worth opening eyes to see this.
I think one of the things that I can do and that I would want to do is continue to take advantage of opportunities like this. We've got the privilege of a group here at Eden that is working to help educate us, and it gives us the opportunity to learn the things that we need to learn that we didn't learn as children, and it's never too late to learn this, and then to share what we learn with others as those topics come up in our daily lives.
I don't know where to begin. There's always a starting point. I am just totally blown away by what I have seen and heard today from not only what's on the screen, but from the friends and my family sitting around this circle. But I don't know where to start. And I think maybe a lot of us feel that way too. I know this is maybe one of the first starts, but I know there's so many, 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 many things that need to be done, and where do you start? And that's where my confusion lies. You know, there's so many things that we can pick from, but what needs to be done?
I'm very thankful, actually, that the United Church is trying to do what they can, and I'm very impressed by the start of having a gentleman like you come in and talk to us about this. Otherwise, I wouldn't know what was going on if it wouldn't be for these kind of sessions. So appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to come in here and meet with us, show us what you have, and I'm going to continue to support whatever you're doing and whatever the United Church is doing.
Because I knew so little as a grown child and what I witnessed, and I'm so happy to have come this afternoon to educate myself a little bit more and to leave the church in a happy way that I can at least spread some word of what I witnessed this afternoon. And so thank you for this committee. Without you, we wouldn't be here. So thank you.
A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to work in an environment where we were trying to address how we could provide better health care for Indigenous communities. And my eyes were really opened at that point in time, because I took a very comprehensive course that really opened my eyes. It was unbelievable. And then I had an opportunity to participate in, it was a sad experience. I worked at Sick Kids, and we had a baby that was dying, and they were an Indigenous family. And I actually witnessed efforts for the first time of staff at the hospital trying to make it meaningful for the family to go through that grieving process, and how could we accommodate them with the various restrictions about, maybe we can't have a fire ceremony or something in the hospital, but what else could we do to make it meaningful and help them through this process? And it taught all of us, too, how we could better work together and understand one another, who are all experiencing the same type of thing, but in different ways. And it's understanding, and it's working with others to see how we can make it happen and treat each other as humans.
Well, I think, too, we've got to become much more proactive with our members of parliament, federally, provincially, and even here in Mississauga, because we definitely have Aboriginal territory that needs to be well looked after, let alone the people that are here as well. And I think that's part of it. We pick up on what Murray Sinclair is saying, that we all need to get together and do more to make things better.
Probably just an amen to what Catherine has said, and that is, it's hard to know where one can actually step in, Bill, and make a significant contribution. But perhaps the first big step is the depth of our understanding, and then what opportunities open before us to take a small step here, a small step there. I'm so appreciative of what is happening here from EMO in terms of educating us, but you're also inspiring us, which may lead to action that at this point we can't see, but a door may open and we'll be on our way.
Well, I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing, and my mission, shall we say, is to continue to support this kind of work. Also to start to unpack the web of lies, really, that has supported this kind of socialization, shall we say, that's these ideas about Indigenous people. And so I think for me, the two main things that I'm trying to do is to help people see that there is a richness in Indigenous cultures and teachings that we can learn from and grow from, and as I say, at the same time unpack all the things that keep that prejudice in place, all the ways that governments continue to say one thing and do another. Just a story, if you don't mind. At the beginning of the pandemic, the government was trying to fulfill one of its mandates, one of the Truth and Reconciliation mandates about treating Indigenous nations as nations, sovereign nations. And, when it came to how that was publicized, because pre-COVID, the news people were all around all the time, so it all looked all nice and fair. And then once COVID hit, my spouse was taking a course on Indigenous polity, and was talking to Pam Palmater at Toronto Metropolitan University, and she was telling us that once the pandemic hit and everything went behind doors, all the things went back to the way they were. It was the same government treating Indigenous people as though they were, well, not to use that they didn't know what they were doing and that they were incapable of knowing what they were doing. And I was just so shocked by that, and I realized that what they now call Indigenous Affairs, which has Jean Chrétien as one of the ministers, that it's not just the politics, but it's also the bureaucracy that is also infected by these ideas. And how do we start to make change in that, and how do we start to hold governments to account to instead of saying one thing and doing another, but to do as they say. So that's where I'm
at. Well, I don't know much about the governments of the United Church, but we all give money to mission and service. We designate some of our funds to mission and service. I'm wondering if there is a specific fund for the Indigenous that they could use for schooling. I mean, they don't even have high schools. A lot of them have to come down from the north and go to high school where people hate them. North Bay or whatever. Where do they go? They go to go to high school, but they have a lot of problems because the people they're staying with don't like them. The people around, when I was young, I worked in Sulaka for a couple of months during the summer. And yeah, people made fun of the Indigenous people, and they did not like the Indigenous people. So I think that's not a good environment for the kids who are going to high school. I mean, in your teenage years, to be going to a city or a town where most of the people don't like you and think you're some kind of drug addict or an alcoholic or whatever. So is there a fund that the United Church has that we could actually designate some of our funds instead of just to general mission and service, but just to Indigenous affairs or whatever? And then, at least we could give some money. I mean, because you always need money. If the government's not going to give them money, then the churches should,
There's so many things going through my mind, but and it might sound oversimplified, but I really do believe that when you know better, you do better. And I think that by being here today, Bill, this is a first step. You are doing something. We're all doing something. We want to learn. We're having our Pi Day on March the 12th. And I'm a retired educator. I was the teacher librarian at our very large elementary school. And when I learned about this, I made it my mission to spend a very large portion of my library budget every year for 5 years buying books about Indigenous studies. And I was purposeful about that. I was intentional about that. And I explicitly taught the curriculum that was changing. And I said to my students how embarrassed I was that I grew up not knowing any of this. And I told them that it was my mission as their teacher to teach them. And I filled the library with books so that they could learn.
Nothing too different. It's really been going around the circle. Just continue learning. That's what I'm going to work on right now. Continue learning.
As Susan said, we've each of us taken a step just by being here and learning and experiencing. And I'm going to take little steps, but they're steps. I am going to post Murray Sinclair's video on Facebook and on my Instagram account. I'm going to tell my grandchildren and my daughter and my son, and I'm going to spread it with friends and with others. And I have a dream tucked in my heart that I want to have clean water for the communities up north that have been struggling with it for years. And I also want to improve their health care systems. I have no idea how I could do that, but I'll put it out there. And we just put out our hearts and take a step.
Lots of good ideas. Yes, Bill. I'd like to know where to start too. And Marnie, I think your idea of a separate fund is a great idea. I don't know why we didn't all think of that, but thank you for mentioning it. Thank you to all the EMO members for organizing this and bringing Reverend Claus here to inform us even more than the little bit that we had to start with. And I certainly will be glad to contribute to that fund that Marnie's going to start and write lots of letters that Susan mentioned and anything else I can do. And I will be here for all of your events for sure, because learning is the first step.
I can just echo that statement. I want to continue to learn and that invest time and energy and attention to this process.
Wow, there seems to be a theme, but I think education is critical, but I think also action. And demonstrably, one thing, the people I'm in contact with through my daily life and activities and things like this, to raise this story and talk about it in environments that's often not talked about. My little 6-year-old grandson said to me the other day when we were taking him to the bus stop, "Grandpa, why do you talk to strangers?" I said, "Well, I talk to strangers because then they're not strangers." And you talk and you have a story. And you know, I'm not, you know, to be safe, I'm not saying run around, send a 6-year-old out on his own, but you talk to ones like this. So I'll give you an illustration. You can come up in a dressing room. I play a lot of hockey and different things like this. And it's not just around this very important subject about reconciliation. It's so critical, but think of other things. There's things said sometimes that maybe it's just easier to sit back there and guffaw or chuckle, but you have to challenge that statement. I'll give you an illustration, and something I will change right now. I was recently at, and the next time, and I feel bad about this, and I'm going to share this. Somebody raised a story and a spot, was in a particular dinner environment, and he made some comment about an Indigenous gentleman, and it was in a joking, he thought it was a joke. I didn't find it funny, I didn't laugh, but I also didn't stand up and challenge him right there, because it might have been uncomfortable. It might have been, for my wife was with me and there was other people there, and I'll commit right now, and I've said this to my wife in confidence, if that ever happens again, I will stand up and say, that is not right, John. Think about that. And you know, and I'm giving that as an illustration. That's a tangible thing. To all my friends and the people here, I will give you my word. I try to do that in life, but that was one little slip up a little while back. And the notion, and right now, and I really want to emphasize, pick up a paper, listen to a book. Look at, there is a lot of work that needs doing to help our Indigenous people right now. And in honor of all the people that went through this, the 38,000 that sadly didn't, as Christina made the point, didn't make it on to a better life or a troubled life, that died, that are in unmarked graves, as you've mentioned, Reverend Lee. That is devastating every time we pick up the ones that, you think about this as a parent, bad enough they take your little 5-year-old away, they're gone, and then, oh, they're not coming home for Christmas, no, and they're not coming home for the summer. You know what, well, they're not coming home. We don't have little number 122 here anymore. 122 is not here. Well, where is 122? I mean, these are tough things. So I'm sorry I'm rambling a bit, but the tangible things, continue to learn and continue to try to make it better for all of our Indigenous people and us with them as settlers. We're settlers. This was not, you know, we came to this land other than you, Reverend Lee, and your family, and thank you for it. Thanks for sharing it with us. We love it, and we've taken great advantage of it. But anyway, so there you go, Patty.
Just like Susan said, I think sharing these links to these documentaries on social media, getting it out that way, that seems to be the way people learn these days a lot of the time. I think I have spoken to my youngest daughter, who is a recreational therapist at CAMH, and I've asked her, do you get a lot of Indigenous kids through your program? Because she's in the Child and Youth Services. And she said, yeah, we do. And so I think I'll send those links to her. Might help her and how she helps them. And then with regards to the government and money, Pat and I were talking about it the other day, and I don't want to offend anybody by downplaying the horrific conditions in other countries in the world, but the government's pretty quick to jump up and say, oh, we're going to give $6 million here, or 10 million here, or $2 billion to other parts of the world, when, wait a minute, it would only cost you a couple million to fix the water on the reservation, and they've been promising to do that for years and years, and it's never happened. So there's money out there, it's just not going to our home situations first, and maybe that's something we have to communicate to the government, that, well, yes, we do like to support worldwide missions, but can't we please take care of our own people first?
And again, my mind is racing just listening to all these wonderful stories and ideas and things that everyone wants to do. And what I'm really observing right now is you're here because you want your minds to be open, you're wanting to learn, but I also sense that your hearts have been really opened to this today too, and we know that's critical. It's one thing to have your mind open, but if your heart's open to it, I think you're going to be more encouraged to keep learning and to keep acting, and you can be sure that Emo will be offering other opportunities for you. I can certainly put things in print, resources. I'll do that on occasion, and we can make sure that that happens for those that are wanting to continue to learn. I sense we've got a wonderful core group of people here now that will pay attention to things that we may suggest in other gatherings. We've got ideas of what we want to do next that we're going to be working on. I'm not sure that the United Church of Canada, listening to Marnie's idea, has a fund for this type of thing for Indigenous, but I can look into that, and I will. And also, I know there are other Indigenous organizations that we gave Emo donated at Christmas time to one that Jen Begin had told us about that works in feeding Indigenous people in downtown Toronto. So there are certainly groups there, and certainly to look into the water situation, and maybe to have a letter writing campaign. We've gotten involved with Rights for Rights here through Amnesty International. Well, maybe we can do our Indigenous rights letter writing, because I think getting to the politicians somehow, if enough people can make a difference. But keep your hearts open, your minds open, and by all means, share with us. Don't wait just for Emo to get back to you with things. As you're learning more and finding more resources, please communicate with us, okay?
I think personally, for me, I will continue to educate myself. I have done a few different activities with this church on Indigenous people. Their cultures, their thinking, their, I don't know if you would call it religion. It makes total sense to me, and I just wish more people in this world would also follow those types of thinking. And then once I learn things, I can try and share it with other people. And when there are elections in the future, pay close attention to what the candidates are saying and try to vote for people that will do the best for Indigenous people and also other people of Canada or Ontario.
So many amazing thoughts and things to do and actions to take, but for me today, I think it's just been amazing to have 25, 27 people here. I can do so much. I can try and learn. I have so much to learn, and there's so much to be done. It's so much easier if I have someone else to follow with me and travel along, and as a team, we can maybe accomplish more. Even just to speak about an issue to one another on a Sunday morning or throughout the week. It's the energy that I have been feeling lately about different things that we have been talking about in the church and moving forward with it's contagious. And I think as we move forward from here, we can make a difference. We can hopefully, I think respect is the biggest thing of all. We need to be respectful of everyone and listen to what they have to say. So thank you for coming. I'm so excited for our next event.
Yeah, I would like to learn more and see what else I can do to help.
I'm learning a lot too. One thing, when you read a paper and you see that there's some sort of an accident or some sort of a robbery that happens, take a look and see where the people are from. In Hamilton, in the Hamilton Spectator, they say from 6 Nations. That's not right. Yeah, you want to support something, an educational thing. I was co-chair of the Sandy Soto Spiritual Center, and that's educating Native people for Native ministry. And that's something that they need help too. This morning, I think that you may have heard the reading from Exodus talking about Moses up on the mountain. And that was the forerunner of getting the 10 Commandments. I've got something here that the Aboriginal people called, and the Native people call, the 7 grandfathers. Wisdom, to cherish all knowledge. Love, to know peace. Respect, to face the foe with integrity. Honesty, honesty with myself and the world. Humility, to know myself as a sacred part of creation. And finally, truth, to know all these things and all these teachings. The 7 grandfathers: wisdom, love, respect, courage, honesty, humility, and truth. And those, like the 10 Commandments, have been developed over years and years and years. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for listening. I hope we lit a sacred fire in your hearts. Blessings and peace to all. Amen.
Reverend Lee, I just want to take a moment to thank you and your lovely wife for coming and leading us in this very moving smudging ceremony, for sure, but also leading this and helping us to watch this film and the films and difficult things and putting perspective on it and helping to, your comment of lighting our fire within our hearts and the smudging. That was extremely, I'm sure that many others felt the same. I've heard of smudging before, I haven't seen it, now I've experienced it. It's sort of like you've heard of swimming. Swimming's a good thing, but if you've never been in a water, you don't really know how great it can be. So this, and knowing that good is going to come from this, we know that's going to happen. And I want to end this by saying what Murray Sinclair said, and that is miigwech. That right? I struggle with that, but thank you. Thank you all.
One thing I forgot to mention that I will check is I believe these 2 films are available through, we did get them, thank you to the National Film Board of Canada. They allowed us to show these today, but I believe they're also available on CBC Gem. Weren't we told, did you look for them? No. Trying to share with people the honor to Senator Murray Sinclair is on CBC Gem, but we'll find if there's a way that we can find a link to Holy Angels. Yeah. Okay.
Just curious as to whether there are other churches in the area, in the neighborhood, that are showing these films. United Church.
Some churches are. Many churches don't. There is and I'm a sitting member of that committee, and we help to give out grants for churches who work with reconciliation. And the name there is Lori. My mind's going to go blank. Lori Ransom. She's the United Church person involved in charge of asking for projects, and she can provide some funding for them. And they do all kinds of things across Canada. If this church wanted to get involved with something like that, talk to Lori and find out more about that. I'll pass that information along to Helen. so that that's something that you could be involved with. Anybody else a question?
I did let the other United Churches in our immediate area know about these 2 particular Sundays that we were doing this, so they've been invited. But it takes word of mouth from other people to know, and maybe as we move forward, because it is something that I think it would be good to have more people involved. But we need this committed core group that will move forward with things with us and get moving. I believe there may be some refreshments coming up. We will stay for discussion.
Okay.